Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order, if I could. First ask for disclosure of interest, please. Councillor Eamon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be declaring conflict on the council referral item number 3 with respect to the Common Elements condominiums, as my wife and I own a condominium in the city of Orillia, and part of our monthly fee goes to support the common elements within that common condominium.
Thank you, Councillor Follis.
Thanks. Through the chair, I would also like to declare a conflict of interest on the same item, referral item number 3, Common Elements Condominium Working Group. I have become aware recently of a potential conflict of interest, and I'm waiting to hear back from the Integrity Commissioner on a final determination. In the interim, I have to declare a conflict, and it's based on the premise that I don't live in a CEC. However, I have a house situated very close to one and could be impacted directly by the decision. Thanks.
Thank you. And anybody else? It was just the two. I also will be declaring a conflict on item 3 of closed session at that. Item 1? Sorry, it is item 1. Sorry. Item 1 on the closed session agenda, and I'll ask Councillor. The nature of my conflict in that case is a business interest in the neighborhood. So, we will move on to the motions arising from closed session. All of them? Just for,
Okay, do you have the motion? Okay. Okay, I need a mover and a seconder for this motion. Moved by Mr. Clustra, seconded by Council. The motion is that this committee recommends to Council that as recommended in the confidential report DSE-19-37 dated October 18th, 2019 from the Development Services and Engineering Department regarding the potential acquisition of a property for a future road and servicing opportunity, option 1 be adopted as set out in the report, and that $5,000 for legal fees be allocated from the Land Acquisition Reserve. Any comments? All those in favor? Motion is carried. Most welcome. There you go.
so we'll move on to the second item on the closed agenda. We need someone to move it and someone to second it, please. Moved by Councillor Heaney, seconded by Councillor Campbell, that this committee recommends to Council that confidential report CAO 19-05 dated October 22nd, 2019 from the Chief Administrative Office regarding a legal matter with respect to the Occupational Health and Safety Act be received as information. Any comments? Seeing none, all in favor? That is carried. The last item out of closed session, I need a mover and a seconder on this, please. Councillor Campbell and Councillor Heaney seconding it. That this committee recommends to Council that confidential report CAO 19-04 dated October 22nd, 2019 from the Chief Administrative Office regarding a legal, personal, and personnel matter with respect to the Occupational Health and Safety Act be received as information. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? And that is carried. Moving on to the open session, we move to consent agenda. Are we aware of anybody who's pulling anything? Nobody's pulling. Councillor Spola.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to speak on item 2.
Okay,
on
that's
the
just to
archives?
speak to, but not change any actions. So we have, we need a mover and a seconder for this. Councillor Fallis, Councillor Klustra, that the recommendations set out on the October 28, 2019 consent agenda be adopted by Council Committee and forwarded to Council for ratification. And Councillor Spoli, you wish to speak to item number 2.
Just some concerns that are the archives that we store at the bottom of the Opera House. I can appreciate that it's not the most suitable place to store these archives, and I'm wondering, through you to our CAO, if there's a move afoot, or this council can put something together that we have our own, because I don't like the idea of going to the county, because if somebody wants to, a staff or a citizen wants to get some of the archives, they have to go to Barrie to get it or look it up, unless it's on our computers or their computers. So I'm just wondering, is there a move afoot, or can we, in our 5-year plan or 3-year plan or whatever we want to do, to put something in place that we can have our own archive, whether it's at the library or at museums or whatever?
Madam CEO.
Through you, Mr. Chair, certainly there's been a lot of work that has actually been done in the current location in terms of protecting the records and so on. But having said that, it's still not sufficient. It's not ideal for storage of very significant records. And with that, through you, Mr. Chair, there is certainly going to be some work done by our records manager to evaluate what opportunities exist in the future for a more appropriate location.
Thank you. Anything
Thank
further
you.
to that? Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Riemann?
Mr. Chair, through you to the CAO, would it be, if this issue were to be reviewed within the term of council, would require reconsideration, I assume, if we move with the motion as it now sits. And I'm just wondering if there are, in fact, staff issues to contemplate additional archive capability, that maybe we should be pulling that piece and just adding at this time to the motion so that we have a little more flexibility going forward.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the issue of reconsideration is always an interesting one because we have to sort of evaluate what's coming forward in order to determine whether, in fact, it would be a reconsideration. With respect to this issue, this was a sort of all-encompassing report that dealt with not only the cultural end of things, but also discussions with OMA as well as the overall city records. If, in fact, there was a solution that would come forward that would be specific potentially to just city records, then, in my opinion, and again, not knowing what the exact motion would be, but it would seem like that might be separate and apart from this overall encompassing report, and therefore council may not deem that to be a reconsideration. So having said that, in order to be absolutely certain and without question, we always sort of add that at this time does sort of solve any questions moving forward about a reconsideration. So we could either pull that motion, which I believe will require an amendment. Yes. So we would require an amendment to the motion that you've put on the floor to accept the consent agenda, and we'll have to amend it to remove item number 2, and then we would have to deal with item number 2 on its own. So those are the options, Mr. Chair, that you could consider.
Thank you very much, Councillor Riemann.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My initial inquiry was stimulated by my being a member of the board of OMA, which is under some pressure in terms of documentation that they are holding and do not have space, nor do they have storage conditions that were appropriate. And we, at the time when we visited the archive, it was that we included the city in the process just to see, because we don't have an archive as such, at least not one of the, I mean, we archive our materials, but we don't have an archive of the quality of the county. So my assumption is that regardless of what we do in the near term, that we are in effect saying to OMA, you're on your own on this, and your archival solution will have to be determined within the board and staff of OMA. Am I correct on that?
And your question is to the CAO?
Whoever in staff can answer it.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think Ms. Otchka might have some input in terms of the conversations that she had with OMA, but at a high level, through you, Mr. Chair, if there's an opportunity that exists that would work for the city and OMA, we certainly could look at that in the future. But at this stage, I understand that OMA isn't quite ready for that. And maybe if I could ask Ms. Otchka to elaborate.
Ms. Ostrowski.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, that is correct. I did have a conversation with the executive director. We talked about their needs. She believes that there may be archival information within their system that could go to the archives. However, they too are not in a position right now to know what all those needs are, how much information they have. The archives is really a repository of information that you don't want to access regularly, if at all, in the future. And so they do have an active collection that they want to be able to access for exhibits and whatnot. So they were happy that we opened up the door, but there needs to be more research on their part in terms of if they have any information that could go to the archives.
Okay, thank you. So the question is an amendment necessary, in your opinion?
I don't believe, Mr. Chairman, that, if I may, I don't believe amendment is necessary at this point. I'm comfortable that if we were to face a situation of severe demand or crisis on the part of the city in terms of needing archival support, that whatever this council would certainly reconsider whatever issue that is and allow us to move forward. I can't see this council investing in providing an archives in the city of Orillia at the level that the county provides. I mean, that's just not financially within our reality of the moment. So I'm comfortable under the advice of the CAO that we can just proceed as is.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have a motion before us, moved by Councillor Fallis, seconded by Councillor Cloustra, that the recommendation set out on the October 28th, 2019 consent agenda be adopted by Council Committee and forwarded to Council for ratification. Any further questions? Being none, all in favor? And that is carried. Moving on to board reports. First item of business has to do with farmers market and a request for additional funds. Who's the lead on that? Here we go. Good afternoon, ladies. Who's taking the, Amy, are you taking the lead on this?
If it's okay with you, Mr. Chair, I will take a lead on the introduction.
Okay.
Perfect. So I am Shauna Ballack. I'm the chair of the Downtown Orillia Farmers Market Management Committee, and with me is Amy Mangan. She is our market manager. We are here to speak to the report that you've all received with regards to a potential revenue shortfall in 2019. The Farmers Market Management Committee is requesting that Council approve the allocation of the remaining available funds from our market reserve, as well as a one-time grant of approximately $62.30 from the operating contingency fund to offset the remaining net losses. Excuse me. The market has been seeing a decline in revenue since 2016, which is directly correlated with a decline in the number of vendors attending the market. In 2017, the market operated at approximately 85 to 90% of the vendor capacity, and at the end of the 2017 season, there was a steep decline of market vendors, which consisted primarily of growers and producers and other such popular vendors. The reasons for leaving varied. Some retired, some moved, some businesses outgrew the market and have moved on to permanent businesses in the Orillia area. In 2018, our vendor capacity averaged 60 to 75%, and in 2019, we have begun to see a slight incline in new vendor attendance, who have been drawing in new and returning customers. I do think it's important at this time to point out that this increase in vendor attendance has actually been due in large part to efforts made by Amy as the market manager. She has been working directly with existing vendors who have historically been prepared food vendors and working with them to encourage them to grow their own ingredients, thereby filling our ratio need for growers and producers. As such, she's planning to continue that strategic focus on vendor retention and engagement as we move into the 2020 season. It is also important to note that farmers markets across Ontario are facing very similar challenges. It's largely driven by changing retail trends, a decreased number of growers, and an increased number of competing markets. With that in mind, many markets have chosen to abandon their true farmers market status, whereas the Orillia Farmers Market, despite challenges, has succeeded in maintaining that 51% grower ratio, thereby maintaining our true market status. Working to encourage market growth, our management committee has developed a proactive strategy to improve market attendance and increase revenue by developing working groups to focus on 3 key areas. We are looking at marketing and location, and events and management and market management development. Each working group will be comprised of FMMC members as well as vendors, and will target specific short-term goals, as well as long-term strategies with a focus on the ongoing success and longevity of the market. With that, we would like to invite your questions.
Thank you very much. I think I'll allow for questions and comments before we get to an actual motion. So if anybody has questions, Dave Campbell, Councillor Dave Campbell, sir.
Thank you, Councillor Lauer. I want to thank you both for the work that you've put into this. And I think one of the challenges that the market is facing is, many that have been spoken to and that are in the report, but also the fact that it's difficult to have people, even on the committee, that have all of the skills that are necessary to not only run the market, set up, tear down, but promotions, et cetera, et cetera. So with that in mind, if it's appropriate at this time, I do have an amendment that I'd like to bring forward.
Councillor,
Okay.
Sorry, Councillor, we need a motion first.
Oh, okay.
To amend.
Sorry.
3, Mr. Chair, I think that the councillor is actually looking for a different motion.
Motion, yes.
Not an amendment. Okay.
That's correct.
Okay.
Sorry.
Carry on.
My first time. Sorry. It's on the screen now, and it's basically it's to allow the market management committee to use the funds that are in the reserve for council to approve the $6,232 to offset the remaining net losses, and also to refer this to staff in our communications and tourism division, where I believe there's expertise that could really help the market to be successful moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Have you got a seconder for that motion? Councillor Eamon? Further questions, further comments? Councillor Klustra.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, to our guest. I'm just wondering, the 3 working groups that you're proposing for 2020, how are you at getting those working groups populated, getting enough interest? How is your the recommendation with going for these next steps going to impact the rest of the marketing that you're currently doing?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. We have commitment from our management committee members to put in the legwork, so to speak, that's needed in these working groups and the extra time to develop these strategies. Following this presentation, our intent is to formulate a presentation to our vendors to ask them to participate as well. We do think that the key to the market success lies in renewing our vendors' investment in the market success. Historically, the farmers market has really been, the ownership has been on the vendors to encourage people to come out, and we would like to see that that passion return.
Before I move on to Councillor Follis and Yeaman, I'm just going to read the actual motion that's before us. And the motion reads that this committee recommends to Council that report FMMC 2019-01 regarding the projected 2019 shortfall for the Orillia Farmers Market be referred to the Chief Administrative Office, Corporate Communications and Tourism Division for a report on future farmers market strategies, and that the allocation of available funds be approved from the market reserve to offset the 2019 revenue shortfall, and that a grant from the operating contingency fund be provided in the estimated amount of $6,230 to offset any remaining net losses. And just to clarify, the first part of this, the second one is approving shortfall that exists now of about 11,000. Is that what it is?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, and then we're a further request is anticipating there'll be a further need for 6,200 to finish off the year. Okay, Councillor Paul.
Thanks. Through the chair, just a couple comments. First, I'm glad to hear that the committee's taking on the initiative to improve fortunes and appreciate the work as it's been laid out. I also wanted to commend Councillor Campbell for his work on this and putting this forward. I'm going to be supporting this, and there's several reasons. The tourism element to this, the community element to this, the historical element, and most notably the positive environmental impact that the farmers market has on our community. And I also see as well, many committees in the city have at times gotten involved with the farmers market in varying ways, having booths set up there, and certainly over the next year I see some potential for certain committees that I'm on to also be involved in that, and so I recognize the importance that the farmers market has, and yeah, happy to support this. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I likewise am impressed by the initiatives taken by the committee to address the issues and the challenges. I only want to underline and be reassured that this referral to the CAO's office, particularly communications and tourism, will result in a collaborative effort in terms of their report taking advantage of and participating to the degree possible in the 3 working groups that are taking place at the committee, at the market committee directly.
Thank you, Councillor Eamon. Mayor Clark, sorry.
Thank you. I'll try to say something fresh because I was going to largely echo some of the comments I've heard already. And I'm much more comfortable supporting this than I was the original motion. So thanks to my colleague, Councillor Campbell, for that. The one issue I do have, and it has nothing to do with the nature of the farmers market. It's a terrific part of our present community, and certainly has been for many, many years. But is precedent setting? Are there precedent setting for this particular committee if the issue should rise again? And I love the steps that you're taking to mitigate the chances of happening, but or the precedent setting for other committees that might come forward with similar asks should they find themselves in a as I say, a similar situation. But I am in support of this and certainly having the city work with the committees that you're establishing. So I will support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. Any further comment? I'll call the question. All in favor? The next item is item 1 under council referrals, and it has to do with the stormwater pumping station at Cedar Island Road, and this is as a result of an inquiry I made. So I think I'm going to ask that Councillor Heen switch so that I can ask the question.
So the recommended motion is that report number FMC 201901 regarding the projected 2019 revenue shortfall for the wrong one. Sorry, that wasn't very good. Okay, sorry about that. I wasn't expecting to be up here. So we have a report on the stormwater sewer and.
That's correct. Thank you, Madam Chair. At its meeting held July 18th, 2019, Council requested that staff prepare a report to provide an overview, efficiency, and reliability of the Cedar Island Road storm pumping station. The motion also asks staff to report any potential solutions to improve the pumping station's functionality. Ultimately, the report before you provides the requested background information on the station and 2 options for Council's consideration. Staff's recommended option is to identify the station as a specific scope of work in the Stormwater Master Plan update. I will hand it over to you for any questions you may have.
Thank you. So, I'll read the motion. Sorry? Do I moved by Councillor Klustra, seconded by Councillor Sepola, the motion that this committee recommends to Council that is recommended in report ESO-19-12 dated October 18, 2019 from the Environmental Services and Operations Department, the review of the Cedar Island Stormwater Pumping Station and surrounding area be included as a specific scope of work in the Stormwater Master Plan update. Do we have any questions? Lauer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question has to do, well, I've got a couple questions, but the first one has to do with the actual original road reconstruction that we did there. We raised the road, I'm not sure how much, but significantly enough. But in the report, it says that there was no consideration given to conveyance. Why would that be, given some of our other regulations that we have in other areas regarding drainage?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, the station was reconstructed, or the road was reconstructed in 2009 when the station was put into place. And ultimately, before the road actually held the water, a crown was placed on the road, and there is essentially some storage pockets built into the road design, and ultimately the flow is gravitational flow towards, but essentially the restrictions on grade, so the ability to convey from a high point to a low point was not there at the time when they did the road, so it ultimately relies on some drawdown from the pump station to get the water down and out to the lake.
So if I could, so basically, if we had gone to open ditching there, we'd basically be creating ponds.
Through you, Madam Chair, that's correct. Due to the elevation and associated with the lake, there'd be standing water in those ditches.
Okay. The second line I wanted to follow was just simply this is, and thank you very much for the report, and it's a good thing to have it sent on to the master stormwater master plan, but that'll take a bit of time. Is there anything in the interim that we can do that, whether it's how often we maintain or the attention we give to that pump, that we might be able to get through the next year or whatever it's going to take before we get to that next stage?
Through you, Madam Chair, one of the things that we are working on, and essentially we've been experiencing in the last few years, is some warming events in the winter. We are attempting to be proactive and see those warming events coming and remove the snowbanks on the city sides of the boulevards to remove the amount of water that is contributing to some of the flooding issues in that area. Unfortunately, due to the property grades being mostly flat, the water that is ponding right now is associated with the snow that's gathered on private property sides. So we will continue to do that until we can get a permanent solution.
Any further questions? Okay, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried.
Moving on to referral item number 2 regarding Affordable Housing Committee Constitution bylaws. And we have Cam and Jill. Who's taking the lead? Jill?
I'm going to introduce it and ask for questions. Through you, Mr. Chair, good afternoon. I would like to thank you for the opportunity, and our committee would like to thank you for the opportunity to come before you to discuss this report. And before I go any further, I would like to thank our staff colleagues, Robin Cadeau and Jill Lewis, who's sitting beside me, for all the help that they have provided on this and other things. They educate me every day. On Tuesday of last week, I'd also like to thank the committee for all their valuable input. On Tuesday of last week, the Affordable Housing Committee agreed that this report was ready to be sent to Council for your consideration. In June of 2019, Council directed the Affordable Housing Committee to prioritize working on a municipal incentive policy for affordable housing. The Affordable Housing Committee has developed an eligibility criteria suite of municipal incentives for Council's consideration. However, the paramount to this policy framework will be the establishment of a funding of an affordable housing reserve. It is recommended to Council the establishment of a funding of affordable housing reserve be referred to the Budget Committee for consideration during the 2020 budget process. In the meantime, and until the Affordable Housing Reserve has sufficient funds, it is recommended that eligible affordable housing projects be forwarded to Council for consideration. The Affordable Housing Committee is also seeking direction from Council as to whether or not a tax holiday should be offered as a municipal incentive for affordable housing. This report contains 3 potential options for Council's consideration. If option 1 is chosen by Council, then staff working with the Affordable Housing Committee will begin on working to develop an affordable/evaluation process and application form and report back to Council with its recommendation. And
Thank you. We might have ready.
Mr. Chair, I do have a question with respect to the motions that if we could answer it before, we might be able to avoid a whole bunch of amendments. And my question is through you to the CAO. The way the motion is read, we're only referring the establishment of the housing reserve to the 2020 budget. And I would like to refer all the funding components of this to the 2020 budget. I'm certainly in support in principle, Cam, of what the committee has come up with. I am, but recognizing, based on some of the discussions we had last week at our strategic planning session and looking at the fact that the county is the primary vehicle by which we support housing, affordable housing, and the fact that the county and indirectly through the county are under significant financial pressure with downloading from the province where funding is disappearing, and there's some extremes there. And the fact that we have significant capital demands coming on the city over the next while, I would like us to be able to make this decision about funding and the amount of the funding in the context of all of the other priorities that we have, or all the other things that we have before us. And at that time, I think we can, because of the principle that is behind this and the fact that there is a need in our community for more housing, can put the appropriate priority on affordable housing and allow the budget process to allocate the funds that are going forward. I do believe that funding will be forthcoming, and I do believe that any efforts that you have to build criteria and work in the short term is useful. I'm not aware of any specific projects that are sitting out there waiting for a funding answer from us on this today. If there are, that would might change my point of view, but my sense is that a delay of 6-8 weeks until the Budget Committee has an opportunity to report would be useful. So I'm not quite sure how best to do that. I'm more than willing to do it through an amendment, but if there's a way to adapt our motion, if there's any consensus to that around the table, I would welcome it. That might just smooth the flow.
Okay. I know Councillor Follis has an idea on this particular issue as well, so I'll let him speak to it, and then we can decide where we're going. And the mayor as well.
Thanks. Through the chair, I wanted to put forward option 1B, which would see the inclusion of a 10-year tax holiday implemented for affordable housing projects. And of course, that would entail, that would guarantee that the projects have to basically follow what is laid out in the report. So there's certain restrictions. They have to be a nonprofit. They have to be getting funding from, I believe, either the county or CMHC, and there's several other qualifications to that. I wanted to speak a bit to the 10-year tax holiday, if possible. We've implemented one before in the city of Orillia. I believe it was 2003 to 2013, if I've got the years correct. And there were, I believe, about 5 projects that benefited from it. And just talking with some staff about it, it did allow these projects to have financial viability and guaranteed that affordable housing could be provided to a lot of Orillians. So there's real-world success stories that we can draw from our own community that show that this particular method works. And I think it's something that we should certainly consider going forward. The other thing I want to bring attention to, credit to Cam Davidson, who's been a really wonderful chair of the Affordable Housing Committee, and sent us just an article a couple of days ago, and the title reads, 84% of Canadians feel that housing affordability is a major issue, according to a national survey. And certainly we saw that during the election, during the federal election that came up. I know both as a councillor and as an individual living in Orillia that this is a priority issue that we have to take seriously. And so I'm really encouraged that we've come forward with this report, and I hope that it continues to create, or it does create the type of affordable housing options that we really need in this community. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Follis. Mayor Clark.
Thanks, and through you, I'm hoping my comments either maybe help crystallize the direction We can go, and I will wait a moment to make those. So I'm going to make a few comments that may or may not help crystallize a direction. And first of all, and I don't say this as with trite, but I do want to commend the Affordable Housing Committee and Cam. I know how passionate Cam and some of his other colleagues that have done other projects within the city are, and I'm not sure if anybody has worn more of a pathway in my carpet, the carpet towards my office over the last 5 years than Cam. So I am in full support of affordable housing, and that happens at a number of different levels across the continuum, everywhere from affordable housing to slightly less than market rates. And rent geared to income is the one that really kind of makes a lot of sense to me. But that's not the only one we need. In fact, I'm part of a small informal working group with the mayor of Barrie, the former mayor of Midland, the present warden, the former warden, and the consensus amongst our group is that what we are doing presently, and I'm not speaking of Orillia, I'm speaking of Simcoe County with a lot of its initiatives, the province and across Canada and across the Western world. There are many, many, many situations where the affordable housing inventory is not keeping up with demand and creating hardships. So I understand the need, and I also believe that we need a systematic change, and I think we also at some point, and this is these incentives may very well do that, involve the private development community to help municipalities and other levels of government meet the need. But I would also caution us as to if we're going to do something like a tax holiday, maybe some of the projects we've supported in the past, we might want to rethink going forward. There's a couple not too far from this city hall that I personally would not support, again, knowing the issues we've had with that and knowing that they are coming off affordable housing in the very, very near future. Further, the county is our provider. We provide, as the report says, just under $2 million, about $1.8 million a year, and they are fairly progressive in their actions. So, I'm supporting what I see as some potentially very good directions in this report. I just want to, as was articulated earlier, put it against the other demands that we have on our financial dollars so we can see the big picture. It may come out of the budget process as our highest priority or medium, whatever. And if it does, then I would be in support of it then. So I would just, Mr. Chair, if you would consider, or if it's a friendly direction to the mover of the original motion, maybe that was a direction he would consider.
So we don't actually have a motion on the floor as of yet. So I'm looking for someone to put something forward formally.
Apologies. I don't know if I initiated the process or not, but to put forward it would be option 1B as the item on the floor. I assume I'm waiting for a document.
It's okay.
Apologies. I'm sorry.
Okay, so we have
I'm only 1 year anniversary of a counselor, so still getting my head around everything.
Okay. Okay. First of all, we have a motion on the floor. Do we need a seconder before we go down this road first, or do you want to weigh it in?
Through you, Mr. Chair, if I may, just in terms of what our observations of the discussion have been. So Councillor Eamon asked the question about referring the report to budget, and I believe that was where he was wanting to head in terms of the motion. That's not what is recommended in the report, but that was what we understand Councillor Eamon would like to move forward with. Councillor Fallis then introduced where he'd like to go in terms of the motion, which is the motion that is set out in the report, with the exception that he'd like to add in 1B as the option. And then we heard over in the mayor's side of the table that I thought, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Mayor, that you were looking to forward to the 2020 budget process. So with that, it sounds like we have a mover and a seconder to forward the report to the 2020 budget process.
Okay, so I think I was just being polite. Double checking to make sure, see if you did have a second. Did you have a seconder for that?
Okay, was there anyone who wanted to second that option first? Just putting it out there.
Doesn't look good. Okay, so now we can move on to Councillor Eamon's motion, which is moved by Councillor Eamon and seconded by the mayor. You'll second? Oh, you're too late. Mayor's already. Councillor Eamon.
Mr. Chair, I'm comfortable with the motion, which accomplishes my major desire, which is to put into the budget process the deliberation of funding of affordable housing. I would not want this motion to be interpreted by the Housing Committee that their energy and effort to begin to build the criteria for adjudicating future projects as it relates to potential funding that the municipality would have in place. It may be that they need to know the specifics of what those projects or those funding mechanisms would be, but if they can continue to work, I would strongly urge that to be something that they can continue to do.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to read the motion. We have a motion moved by Councillor Eamon, seconded by Mayor Clark, that this committee recommends to Council that report AHC-19-02 dated October 18th, 2019 from the Affordable Housing Committee regarding the creation of an incentive policy program for affordable housing be referred to the 2020 budget deliberations. Ralph.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just Councillor Fallis' idea of 1B, that can be brought up when we go to budget as well, can it not? Yeah, okay. And the other fact I want to point out is I want to thank Jill for her excellent work in this as well. I mean, staff did a great job, so it wasn't just a committee, it was staff that did a really good job. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Clark.
Thank you. Very quickly, I just want to reiterate that I truly believe if we're going to change the affordable housing issue, in other words, increase the inventory and decrease the number of people that cannot find affordable housing, then we need innovative strategies, and I want to commend the committee for thinking outside the box and bringing some forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. Councillor Heen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions, if that's okay with you.
Yes.
First of all, through you, how much money do you think we need to put in this fund to make it viable?
Through you, Mr. Chair, as was stated in the report, a reserve in the range of $1 million to $2 million would be appropriate for, just based on the experience that this council had with Building Hope, and that was just shy of $1 million support. So that was one project.
Thank you. May I continue? And in reading the report, you were saying that the County of Simcoe also offers the additional financial assistance for affordable housing, and you listed a couple of different options. You had the rent supplements, housing allowance, and I thought that one was available to people in Orillia now. I gather it's not, or can you...
Through you, Mr. Chair, those programs are available. Those are existing programs that are offered.
So, and the secondary suites is already available to people in Orillia?
Correct.
So, and the Ontario Renovates and the rental arrears. So would we be picking up that instead of the county doing it, or how would that work?
Through you, Mr. Chair, this would be an entirely different program. So those are, this would be to help lower the construction costs of an affordable housing build, similar to what you did with Building Hope. So that's a different program than helping somebody with a secondary suite or offering a rent supplement. So those programs would continue to be offered by the County of Simcoe. What is proposed here is helping to lower the construction costs of an affordable housing build, similar to what was done with Building Hope.
Thank you.
Councillor Follis?
Thanks. Through the chair, I was going to say, while I would prefer to determine the option ABC right now, I can understand councillors' desire to get a bit more research on it, get a bit more understanding of it, as it does require a lot of background for sure. The question I had, I just wanted to confirm. So the motion put before us here, if it's rejected, then it's a reject. Like it's either it goes to budget committee process or the entire proposal is rejected. Just wanted to make sure I've got that correct.
I would look to the clerk to confirm that, but...
Through you, Mr. Chair, we are in council committee, so if this motion passes, it'll be brought forward to the council meeting next Monday. If this motion does not pass, then it dies at committee. And if there's a further motion that is brought forward, then council committee could consider that. But if there are no motions that come out of council committee on to council, then the issue does not move forward.
So if this one lost, you would have to bring forward another one and find yourself 4 votes.
Absolutely. That's all the information I needed.
Okay.
Appreciate it. Thanks,
so you're
guys.
not bringing forward an amendment or anything? This is fine the way it's going forward?
I mean, after that attempt, no, I won't bring forward anything else, no.
Any further questions or comments on this particular issue? I've read the motion. I won't read it again. I'll call the question. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Mr. Davidson, as always. All right, okay, this is your conflict, right? The next item of the business is under referrals, item 3. It has to do with the Common Elements Condominium Working Group. And Mr. Sugden will be doing the lead on this one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So report number DSC 1933 was written in response to a council referral of a report written by the Common Elements Condominium Working Group under their report number CEC or WG 1901, which was presented to council in July of this year. In that, the working group recommended that their mandate be expanded beyond its original mandate to examine taxation issues, and so that their mandate be expanded to include an exploration of how the services within those CECs could be assumed by the municipality for maintenance purposes. So with that, before I get into the rest of my presentation notes, I just thought I'd put things into a little bit of context. So in Orillia, we have a little over 11,000 properties. That's of all types, not just residential, but all types of properties. Within Orillia, there's 14 common element plan of condominium corporations, which occupy or are made up of about 580 individual dwelling units. There's another 17 standard plan of condominium corporations, which the CEC working group refers to as horizontally built. Because as council may be aware, or council committee may be aware, there's standard plans of condominium that are vertical and standard plans of condominium that are horizontal. So think of Panoramic Point for a vertical example, and think of North Lake's a common element. Another one would be like Coventry Court or something up on West Street. That's a standard plan that's horizontally built. So there's 17 standard horizontally built plans of condominium in Orillia with a total of 518 units approximately in those units. Some of those, I say approximately because some of them have a combination of street townhouses and stacked multiple dwelling units within them, such as one up on Lackley Street. There's an example there for people to be aware of. There's a private organization in Ontario which is called the Condominium Authority of Ontario, and they're an authority that's been put together to help inform condo buyers, condo boards, condo residents on all things condo. So they've published a condo buyer's guide, which is quite helpful, and I'll just refer to a couple of stats in their guide, which is in Ontario right now, there's a little over 800,000 condo units, representing about 1.6 million residents in Ontario. 60% of all new homes being built in Ontario right now are condos. So I cite these stats because they shine a little bit of a light on the issues raised by the CEC working group and Mr. McLagan before there was a working group, which it seems that it's a very popular form of development. It's a legal form of development in Ontario. It seems to be problematic in Orillia. I can't find other examples of the types of concerns outside of Orillia that the other 1.6 million people living in condos are experiencing. So, with those stats behind us, I just wanted then to jump into sort of a summary thing. The report itself is quite detailed, and it contains information that's been presented in 2 other staff reports prior to this. It provides an explanation of what a condominium is versus a plan of subdivision. The root of the issue that the CEC working group is asking to have their mandated expanded to is they feel that their private ownership of the services within the common elements may not be sustainable in the long term, that their condo boards may not fully understand what they've purchased, their residents may not fully understand what they've purchased, and they believe that because they pay the same tax on an assessment per assessment basis as non-condo owners, that there's an unfair treatment, and therefore to make it fair, the municipality should assume the services. So the staff report explains the differences. In effect, in very similar or simple explanation, if you buy a lot in a plan of subdivision, it's called a freehold ownership. So you own everything you've bought, meaning you bought the house, you bought the yard and the lot, and you make independent decisions as to how and when to maintain it. When you buy a condo unit, regardless of the style of condominium that it is, you buy 2 things. You buy your unit in which you live, and you buy a share in commonly owned property. And the commonly owned property is what the condo corporation owns and manages. So in a panoramic point type of situation, a vertically stacked standard plan of condominium, the condo corp would own the parking lot, the underground parking garage, the elevators, the hallways, the building exterior, windows, ceiling, roof, all that kind of thing. And what you own is just from the middle of your walls in. In a common elements plan of condominium, the ownership pattern is a little bit different. You own your dwelling unit and typically the land around it, but everything else is a common element. So how you get to your unit is by driving on a driveway which is owned in common with you and all of the other owners in the condominium. Whereas in a plan of subdivision, you drive across a municipally owned road to get to your property. So the CEC working group would like to expand their mandate to look at ways for the municipality to assume responsibility for the common elements within within condo corporations. The complexities of that going retroactively, so for existing condo developments, are massive, and I can't understate it. Those corporations have been created through various complex Planning Act processes, and it's a form of ownership that would have to be undone and a new form of ownership created. Because each individual owner has a share of somebody else's stuff, all owners have to agree to any change in ownership. One person can't dissent from the rest of the group because they're actually any decision affects all of the owners. With that in mind, staff have recommended that there was other concerns the CEC working group dealt with related to concerns that they had as buyers of condo units that they weren't fully informed. So their real estate agents or their lawyers didn't fully inform them what they were buying, what the potential costs in the future could be as a condo owner. And they wanted to find ways to make sure that information was disseminated early prior to making a buying decision. They also had concerns that the municipalities deal with the developer, and we enter into agreements with the developer, we take securities to ensure the developer performs, and we release those securities to the developer. And there was concerns that the condo corporation, who becomes the long-term owner of the common elements and is responsible for maintaining them, doesn't have all of that background history, doesn't get the information, doesn't get a turnover package as far as what they own. So they don't know what types of pipes are in the ground, they don't know how to maintain them, that sort of thing. So there was a recommendation in the CEC working group that there would be conditions imposed through the development approval process to force developers to provide better information at the beginning and provide a turnover package at the end to the condo board. So staff recommends that we create conditions for those two aspects and not deal with the assumption issue, because the ways to go through that process are onerous at the least. Complexity with the issues on imposing conditions, so it's only affects new developments going forward, would not affect existing developments. And then also only about 50% of the condos applications that the city deals with are draft plan approval condominium applications, meaning that those are the ones in the legislation that we can impose conditions upon. Condo exemption is another way to go through of getting a condominium created, and we have no authority in the Act to impose conditions of approval on a condo exemption application. So each time a developer requests to go through a condo exemption, and if the city consents to that, we cannot impose conditions, meaning that they've gone through some other process to get there first, such as zoning amendment or site plan or a combination thereof, and they've met our requirements for condo exemption. We can't then impose new conditions on them in order to finish the process. So the recommendations in the staff report would only affect about 50% of applications going forward, and only affect those that are going through draft plan approval. And other than that, through condo exemption, we have no way of doing that. So staff's recommendation is that we create some additional conditions of draft plan approval and then dissolve the condo CEC working group.
Thank you, Mr. Sugden. Questions? Councillor Klooster.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair, to staff. With this recommendation going forward, and these conditions are brought to the prospective homeowner, and they sign off on this agreement with the developer, the lawyer, and the real estate agent, is there any opportunity for them to come back after the fact once you've given all this information?
Through you, Mr. Chair, like any real estate transaction, it is certainly a buyer beware situation, right? So any purchaser of property, in whatever form that property is, should inform themselves through good, sound legal advice from the real estate agent, and research on their own to make sure they understand what it is they're buying. Whether they could ever come back against the municipality for a developer not having provided something, that's a question for a lawyer to answer, and not me, unfortunately.
Mayor Clark, did you have your hand up? Or we'll go to Councillor Heen.
Thank you, Councillor Lauer. We bought our first home as a condominium 47 years ago, and they said the concept would never fly, that they wouldn't be around for long. The condominium exemption, I don't quite understand that. From your explanation, if 50% of the condominiums are going that route, once the developer realized he could get an exemption and wouldn't have to do this extra work, wouldn't they all end up by doing that? Can you explain that a little bit more, because I really don't understand it?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So through the Condominium Act, it refers to two different ways in which condominiums can be approved, one of which is draft plan of condominium, which is similar to a draft plan of subdivision, whereas there's an application made, a public meeting must be held before the plan can be approved, and then there's conditions can be imposed by the approval authority that the developer must adhere to in order to get and complete the condominium creation. Condo exemption is another process within the Condominium Act that allows you to bypass those first few steps, which is making the application for condo draft plan approval and public meeting process. And the basis of that is that condominium is a form of tenure or land ownership and not a land use. So it's a type of ownership as opposed to a type of land use. If you're changing a type of land use, say from commercial to industrial or industrial to residential, the public has a right to be involved in that. If you're creating new lots, the public has a right to be involved in that in the Planning Act. If the development is such that all you're doing is changing how it's owned, then there's really nothing that the public's influence can change in that. So the condo exemption process is allowing that. So where we've already gone through a public process, such as a zoning amendment, which deals with the land use, saying I'm going to take this property, think of the former Atlas Block site, which was a commercial industrial type of land use where they made precast cement pavers, and the developer bought that to turn it into a residential subdivision and condominium plan. So he had to go through a public process to do the zone change. He did a public process for a plan of subdivision. But when it came to changing how the ownership type is, he's entitled to apply for condo exemption because everybody was involved in the change of land use. Everybody was involved in the creation of parcels within there through the plan of subdivision. But then to put in a condo plan on top of that, just saying these people own it in this manner, the Condo Act allows for an exemption to that, to further public consultation in that.
And what would have been the other route that would have meant that they could get all the paperwork?
So in that case, through you, Mr. Chair, the developer would have needed to apply for draft plan of condominium. So there's a cost advantage and a time advantage to a developer to pursue condo exemption. And that's why many of them choose to go that route. The Act requires, the Act enables municipalities to allow for condo exemption, and where municipalities wish to allow for it, they have a condo exemption bylaw, which then sets up the conditions that have to be satisfied before someone can qualify for that. So we have that here. It's a fairly simple set of tests, and if they meet those tests, they can pursue condo exemption.
Go ahead.
So we're scuppered. We can't force them to give them the paperwork in any way then. Is that what you're saying?
Through you, Mr. Chair, for future developments, if they go through draft plan of condominium, we can impose conditions that require a paperwork turnover at the end. For existing developments, we can't do anything. Those are behind us and they're created. For condo exemption applications in the future, we don't have the ability to impose conditions.
So what can we do to help future owners get that paperwork? Is there anything we can do?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think because condo exemption is an option open to municipalities, certainly the council could consider not allowing condo exemptions and just running with standard plan of condominium. That would, of course, be something council would have to consider because it would put us in a less competitive position with other municipalities around us where we'd be making development more costly and more burdensome than others around us. So it is a financially attractive route for the developer to go through. And if they can do development easier elsewhere, they often choose to do so if the market exists in those other locations.
Thank you. Is that it? Anything further? Well, you can think about it and come back. Okay. You're still scuppered, yeah. I'd also point out that this is the city supplementing the real estate and legal profession. Right? I mean, these are things that should be coming through lawyers and real estate agents. We would just be supplementing that. Right? Mayor Clark.
Thank you, and through you to anybody who will care to listen. As a good chunk of this discussion has been in the last few minutes, covering part of the OCEC committee's concerns, has been around the issue that there was a lack of education either between the developer and the purchasers, or the purchasers' lawyers and the purchasers, and I think it's responsible, but I also think it's good that staff are recommending something that will at least shore up some of that communication going forward. Although, as we learned, it won't happen in all situations. We all have received the letter from Mr. McLagan, and he is a passionate soul, not just on this, but on other things in the community, very involved. And he points out two issues. One is a lack of notice when they heard about this report. So I do want to remind him, although I'm sure he's in tune enough to know this, but that he or the committee or the group have basically this week, what I refer to as a week of sober second thought, because this is council committee, and whatever the decision that council makes tonight, it won't be ratified or considered for ratification until next week. So I just want to make sure they understand that. And of course, the second issue they bring up is a perceived lack of fairness in treatment, and they use pretty strong language like blatant and fatally flawed, and I get that. I understand that they're passionate about that, and they understand that they have a very significant. They believe that it's a significant case, and I understand some of the arguments for that. But with this being provincially enabled development, and with 60% of new development being condominiums, and I assume a significant percentage of those being CECs, it almost seems to me that if they're looking for that kind of change, it may have to be taken to that level. But anyway, I leave that comment where it is. And I think I'll leave my comments off there, but just a reminder that there is a week that they have to communicate with members of council if they so desire. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. Any further comments or questions? I'll read. Everybody sit back for a minute, and I'll read the. First of all, we need someone to make the motion and second it. Councillor Klustra and Councillor Spola. That this committee recommends to council that is recommended in report DSE 1933 dated October 11th, 2019 from the Development Services and Engineering Department staff be directed to develop the following. A condition that can be imposed where applicable by the City of Orillia in the conditions of draft plan approval or through an applicable development agreement that requires the developer of common element plan of condominium developments and horizontally built standard plan of condominium developments to advise prospective purchasers of the ownership framework of condominium developments and costs associated with the long-term maintenance and repair of privately owned infrastructure. B, a condition that can be imposed where applicable by the City of Orillia in the conditions of draft plan approval or through an applicable development agreement to require the developer of common elements plan of condominium developments and horizontally built standard plan of condominium developments to supply the board of each condominium corporation a common elements infrastructure turnover and commissioning package including but not limited to all final approval plans for the development together with information about the ongoing maintenance and operation needs of the common elements infrastructure. C, a condition that can be imposed where applicable by the City of Orillia in the conditions of draft plan approval or through an applicable development agreement to require the developer of common element plan of condominium developments and horizontally built standard plan of condominium developments to supply the board of each condominium corporation a quality turnover package including but not limited to all revised designs, inspection reports, final as-built drawings, with stamped engineering approvals, video inspection records, etc., and that the Common Elements Condominium Working Group be dissolved. Just before I call the question, I'd thank Mr. Sugden for all the work he's done on this file. I'm not sure he shares my enthusiasm, but I found this quite interesting, and I learned a lot about the way the Condominium Act works and so on and so forth. And I know he put a lot of time into it, and it's appreciated. Any further comments? I'll call the question. All in favor? And that is carried. The last item of business, with a full complement, is departmental reports, and no, that's right. Still missing one. This has to do with the Mississauga Street Downtown Improvement Project. Mr. Sear, are you leading it, or Mr. Sugden? Wes?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members of Council, fellow staff, and honored guests, report number DSE 1934 provides an overview of the sequence of works required to execute the strategic planning initiatives recommended in previous studies such as the Downtown Tomorrow Plan, Orillia Port Area Public Realm Plan, and the Streetscape Improvement Plan. As many of the projects are interconnected, a systematic execution is essential to the successful implementation of the vision of our downtown. The report provides a brief description of each project and illustrates a schedule of works through the next 7 years. Specific fixed tasks or milestones need to be met before the next phase of the project can move forward. For example, Centennial Drive cannot be realigned until the CN trunk sewer is relocated to Front Street. Construction of a pumping station and local collection system in the waterfront area also need to occur before the existing trunk sewer can be removed and Centennial Drive realigned. Coldwater Road cannot extend to Centennial until the new alignment is constructed. And Mississauga Street reconstruction cannot progress to the West Street intersection until the transit terminal is relocated. As these critical milestones are fixed, a slip in the schedule will be detrimental to the overall work plan. All tasks from design engineering, tender preparation, contract award, and construction must meet critical deadlines in order to complete the projects efficiently and within the desired overall schedule. The report also discusses project execution of Mississauga Street and proposes a phased approach over 4 years. Included in this are pre-planning requirements to minimize the impacts and inconveniences of reconstructing a downtown core. Communications planning, access plans, traffic management, parking, and garbage collection are all critical events to strategize prior to project execution. The total estimated cost in today's dollars is approximately $55 million. City staff have actively pursued external funding programs such as the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, and we have been successful with provincial approval of the transit terminal in the public transit stream intake. In 2017, Council elected to defer specific road reconstruction projects that were identified in the 10-year plan to provide the financing necessary to complete the Centennial Drive and Front Street reconstruction projects. In order for the transit terminal and Mississauga Street projects to move forward, Council will need to consider funding options for the portions not covered by grants. Additional funding will need to be established as current levels of funding are fully allocated to the existing projects within the 10-year plan. I'll be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Thank you. We'll go to questions first. Councillor Spola.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just on the downtown project, the revitalization of it, you've got here Andrew Street from Mississauga to Colborne, and then Albert Street from Mississauga to Colborne, and Albert Street from Mississauga to Nottawasaga. That street itself is not within the BIA. So I'm wondering why, is it needs sewer and water, or is it just a revitalization part of it, and why it's almost $2 million, almost $3 million?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So through our discussions internally, we decided that it would be valuable information to just present those additional streets. We estimate using basically $11,000 per kilometer, so per linear meter. So those were just included, although they're outside of the BIA. It was requested that they were added just for some context. We haven't included them in the overall plan, or we haven't scheduled for them at all. So just for your review.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, on Saturday I attended the Sunshine Initiative, and one of the questions was the downtown area, making it a progressive area, and it had the most comments on it. On the, and Councillor Follis was there, and the mayor was there as well, and Pat, sorry. And that was one of the key elements that people wanted to see, a vibrant downtown. So I think we need to move this up from the 2024 to 2027. So I hope council has, maybe during our budget deliberation, we have the initiative to be able to advance that a little. The downtown is the heart of a community, and I want to thank you for all the work you've done on it, because I do have a set of the plans and went through it, and they're really well done. But I think we really need to speed up the process, because if we don't, our downtown could be in trouble.
Further questions or comments? We need someone to make this motion. Oh, sorry, Councillor Heen.
Actually, I'm really excited to see it moving up as far as it has. When we first came on council 5 years ago, it wasn't even included in the 10-year forecast. And I was on the DOMB at the time, and I pushed and pushed for it. And I know Councillor Cipolla pushed and pushed for it. So the fact that we're progressing this far is really, really exciting. So if we can go further, that's even better. But as I was reading through this on the weekend, I was actually smiling as I was reading through it, thinking, yes, we're getting there. It's actually going to happen. So thank you for all your hard work. It's really appreciated.
First, Mr. Sugden, then the CAO, and then Ralph. Sorry, Ralph.
So through you, Mr. Chair, just further to Councillor Heen's comments, and she is correct, in the previous versions of the 10-year capital plan, none of the work related to Mississauga Street reconstruction and rehabilitation was within the 10-year horizon. It's still technically is outcompeted by many other pieces of infrastructure that are at a higher priority or worse condition. But because of all of the other investments council is making, we've put it into the 10-year capital plan, matching what is in this work plan report as far as timing goes, so council through the budget deliberation can understand where it could fall. Is clearly shown as there's insufficient funding or no funds available because of all the other competing road and infrastructure projects that are fully utilizing all of the reserve funds we have to carry those out in an orderly planned fashion. So at the time that budget deliberations occur, you'll have some considerations to make if as Councillor Cipolla said, you want to move it up. One of the ways we've done it in the past is we've deferred other projects that were already planned to pay for, or you have to consider how you're going to fund it. And there's multiple ways which Mr. Lane can explain to you much better than I could. Okay.
Thank you, Madam CAO.
Through you, Mr. Chair, though you don't have the motion on the floor as of yet, one of the recommendations I would make is that we do add a line to ensure that it is actually referred to the 2020 budget deliberations, just so that we can continue this discussion as part of the 2020 budget deliberations and also have the discussion about the funding mechanisms potentially.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Cipolla, and then Councillor Follis, and then Councillor Eamon.
Yeah.
Oh, no. And then the mayor, and then Councillor Eamon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Going through the proposals, going through the proposal that was done and everything else, for me, it brings back a lot of memories from 1978 when we first started the project here, and that's how we got the trees and the new lights and everything else. So the concept that you've established or you've designed is quite appropriate for the changes that we're seeing in today's society, today's world, and also with the high tech that's coming on board with autonomous vehicles and all that good stuff that goes with it. So I am totally a strong supporter and be happy to move the motion.
Mayor Clark.
Thank you. I just I again want to sincerely thank staff for this because I know it was largely championed by councillors Sepola and Heen in the last term of council, and with enough support to move it along. In retrospect, I do believe this is a project that needs to be contemplated now, no matter when the shovel actually goes in the ground. It's a comprehensive process, as laid out in the illustrated timelines, and if we approved it budget in some way, shape, or form in the next couple of months, it would still be a number of years before actual construction took place. The detailed design and whatever EAs have to take place will take up a significant amount of time. But make no mistake, this is a significant amount of money. And I think the Mississauga Street alone was in the ballpark of $18 million, as I recall. And the side street allocation, though some of them, I think added up to be $6+ million, maybe $6 to $8 million. And I'm not sure whether it's this council that needs to contemplate exactly where that money is going to come from or not. I think what this council needs to do with the help of staff, of course, is articulate in some way, shape, or form where the money could come from, where we have capacity to cover it off. We won't be able to do. I don't think we're going to be able to do it in cash flow, which we've been doing for the last few years for some of the projects. Just a reminder. To some that we were supposed to go out and debenture $20 to $25 million to finish off some of the major capital projects that we've had going for the last few years. We, because of positive cash flow at the city, we no longer had to do that, and only we're having to go into a short-term line of credit up to $5 million, which we haven't even had to do that at this point. But this project is likely, certainly in conjunction with other major capital projects that we'll have on the go, will cause us to I think, contemplate where the funding resource could come from and where it could come from. And I think my sense is we articulate that for the next the term of council. But the other thing to consider is if you're going to add any time in the near future a project like that, and I'm waiting to see our core service review results, because I'm going to get a sense, despite the feelings of some may have in the community, that we may need to add some staff. And if we're going to add projects like this, we need to make sure that we're not only financially resourced, but we're resourced at a staffing level as well. And that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. Councillor Eamon. That's you.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, this is a question, I think, through you to Ian. In our arrangements and agreements with the developers of Matchadas Lofts, do those agreements require them to, or are they going to be upgrading the sidewalks, at least on the side of the building that they currently own? And if so, are they going to do it in a style that would be compatible with the contemplated refurbishment of the downtown?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it's been a while since I looked at that site plan agreement, but the simple answer is yes. The developer is required to restore the public realm in front of that building, and so or adjacent to the building. I just can't recall off the top of my head what standard we use, but it was certainly that development was approved before the streetscape design concept was presented to council, separated by a number of years. So they were likely required to develop it to a similar standard to the streetscape that exists today, except in a new condition. They did also, in order to take advantage of density bonusing for the fifth story height on the building, they had to provide some enhancements to that streetscape as well, which they're required to do through some additional landscaping and street furniture on the Matchadas Street side, I believe. So.
Yeah, just as a supplement, I know the developer has been quite cooperative in dealing with this, so I assume we will have discussions as the development comes to a close that will enable us to potentially influence some change if change is appropriate in what he is contemplating.
Councillor Follis, did you want to go?
Just a quick, just a question for clarity, and I believe the amendment proposed by Councillor Cipolla answers this question, but I just wanted to confirm the features of this report will be deliberated individually at the 2020 budget deliberations. I just wanted to confirm that's the case.
Just to clarify, there's no amendment at this particular time. This is just the motion as it stood. This is what you're seeing on the screen is the original or the motion as presented.
Through the chair, sorry, I apologize. I thought the second line had been an addition. Just making sure I've got it right, though. The various features that are put forward here, each of them individually will get deliberated.
Mr. Sugden.
Through you, Mr. Chair, and I'll start, and certainly if I miss anything, Mr. Sear will finish up. So just to be clear, all of what's in this report falls within the 10-year capital forecast book that you'll get as part of your 2020 budget deliberation materials. Typically, what's deliberated on a project-by-project basis is the proposed coming year's capital projects, so 2020. None of these projects are in that area except for the Front Street reconstruction phase 2. Everything else falls out of the 2020 horizon and goes into the 10-year horizon. Typically, council doesn't deliberate those 10-year matters, except in this case, because we've thrown a whole bunch of projects in there that sequentially must happen one after another, and for some of them, there's no funding. That may be where it's there for council's information, so you can deliberate how will you fund that when those projects come up. What do you need to set aside now, or what do you need to defer now, or what do you need to do to make those possible when they come up?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cipolla.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 8, just a question. You got Mississauga Street construction in 4 phases, which, if for budget purposes, you're looking at about $18 million. The above projects, do we have to do the above projects before we do the downtown, or can the downtown be done prior to? Queen to Coburn is done, almost done. Coburn to Nawash, yeah, I can understand that. But then you got sanitary and then Centennial Drive construction. Do those projects have to be done prior to the downtown, or?
Yeah. Through you, Mr. Chair. So currently our work on Front Street is enabling some development parcels to be created in the downtown area. So what we're doing is removing a large trunk sanitary sewer to Front Street. Once we have that constructed on Front and we want to decommission that to free up the development lands, we need to construct the pump station and local collection system. So essentially all the underground works from at least Mississauga to the south would have to be constructed, as well as the surface works. We currently have design and EA underway for the entire length of Centennial Drive, including the Coldwater Road connection. I wouldn't recommend that those are deferred outside of the current sequence now. It would cause some issues with removals, but I think as you see it here, it would likely need to happen that way.
Supplementary, if I may. The Mississauga Street reconstruction, the sewer, water, and everything else, they were all done in the early 80s and everything else. Have we inspected them? Do they really need to be replaced at this time? And because I know some of it from Andrew to Albert has never been used, the new ones that were put there. So it's the bottom one that in order to save money, we use the old sanitary sewer lines, and then they were never connected. The new ones were never connected.
Through Mr. Chair, so through our asset management work, we've been trying to understand the quality of the infrastructure under the road right now. So this plan you see before you includes replacing all of that at this point. But as we creep closer to project execution, we'll take a look at what's there. So it's 40 years old at this point. We do have some failures in the water system. You'll probably remember some main breaks on Mississauga Street. But we'll likely look at it closer to execution to see what we can leave and what we need to replace.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Follis.
Thanks. Just a final supplemental question there. I just wanted to ask, does accepting this report as information bind us to the dates that are outlined in this report?
Through you, Mr. Chair. No, you're only deferring it to the Budget Committee and understanding the planned project execution over the next 7 years.
Thanks.
Okay, just before I go on, is it okay if I read the motion just so we know what we have on the floor? Oh, okay, go ahead.
I think it's important, Mr. Chair, that my colleagues remember that we are proceeding with a waterfront development effort, which we are going to, we have already shortlisted developers. We are going to put out a request for proposal that is contingent on the Front Street and Centennial Drive components of this. And we have, in fact, on a number of occasions confirmed the sequence of those and have built into our 10-year capital plan the funding of those. So they're there. The Mississauga Street development is not contingent, though it's supportive and contemplated by the Downtown Tomorrow plan, but it hasn't been one of the pieces that is been driving the waterfront redevelopment. So to alter the dates and alter the sequence on the components that drive the waterfront development will have significant impact on our ability to attract a purchaser for the Metro property. And our hope is that that purchaser will not only build out a very attractive and exciting development in that area, but will return to the city the investment we have in those lands, as that was an investment we made as a city to enable this to go forward. So I do want to say that from my point of view, and I think the last council, and I believe this council as well, we've got a pretty firm commitment to move on some of this. The latter part is most desirable, and as we go forward, we won't be making decisions in this budget cycle as to spending money, I don't believe, on Mississauga Street, but as the mayor said, it's pretty important for us to contemplate that if we're looking at $55 million worth of investment in the totality down here, that we need to be aware that that is a huge amount of infrastructure investment and doesn't include all the other infrastructure investments that our city needs to either catch up on because we've fallen behind over the last few years, or are in support of other important initiatives that we would like to push forward. So we are facing that kind of a challenge, and I think we will have some interesting discussions and debates as we move over the next several months in the light of our strategic plan, in the light of our corporate, with the thing, what do you call that? The other report we're getting, yeah. So anyway, so that was my.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Eamon. I believe this motion will be moved by Councillor Spola and seconded by Councillor Heen, and it will read that this committee recommends to Council that report DSC-1934 dated October 15th, 2019 from the Development Services and Engineering Department regarding an overview of the waterfront works that have been strategized as part of the Downtown Tomorrow Improvement Plan and the Orillia Port Area Public Realm Plan be received, and that the report be referred to the 2020 budget deliberations. And if I could, I have a question. Have we contemplated or anticipated any contribution from the BIA? The last time this was done, obviously there were enhancements made, the trees and this, but specialty lighting and the paving stones and things like that. And I believe at the time the BIA made a contribution, fairly significant contribution. Have we anticipated in our funding model any further contributions from the BIA?
To you, Mr. Chair, at these early stages, no, we haven't, but I suspect that'll be something that'll be evaluated as we move forward.
Councillor Spola.
Thank you. The BIA contributed over $1 million, which we paid off. It was supposed to be for 10 years, and we paid it off in 6. I think it was 6.5. Just a quick question. If the provincial government comes up with some funds for BIAs, to do projects like this, is it possible for us to speed up the process? Because there is, well, I'm very careful how I say it, but there might be an opportunity for us to get provincial funding for some of this.
Mayor Clark.
Sorry, I'll comment on that first. I just want to say that I think anytime there's an opportunity from a federal senior level of government, we'll look at it and figure out how we can take advantage of it or leverage it. But my first blush response is we have lots going on right now, and I would suggest that the workload that some of our, if not all of our departments have right now is probably tapped out. And if we were going to take anything else on, it would be more than just a financial consideration. It would be a staff resource consideration.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. Councillor Heen.
I'm responding to Councillor Sepola's remarks about the downtown putting in the extra $1 million. If that was the case, would they not have to increase their levy for the next while so that they're building up towards that amount? How is that done, Councillor Sepola? Through you to Councillor Sepola.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, what we did is we borrowed the money from the city and we paid it back in 6.5 years. And then we did our regular budget, which included paying off the city over the years.
Okay, I think we've had enough discussion on this, except for the last word, which always goes to Mr. Lang.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll just comment on some of the financial aspects, and the motion as it is now is referring it to the 2020 budget. And as has been discussed, most of the project, or at least the Mississauga Street component of the project, is currently a future year project. Council will not be making formal decisions on that in this budget cycle. However, it will become part of the 10-year capital forecast, and that, going to another question, is one of the reasons why Council does not formally adopt a forecast, in that it doesn't lock Council in either in terms of the dates or in terms of the project at all. It is just a forecast of what's going to happen. So there's flexibility there in how that's managed. The one aspect that Council will be looking at this year is the mechanisms or the financial options of how the project will be funded. As has been discussed, there's currently no money earmarked, set aside in any of the funding sources. So Council is going to have to turn their mind to that. They can do that in advance of the project, or they can do that in conjunction with the project. Quite possibly, a form of debt will be looked at to financially manage this project, and that's where I'm careful to point out that debt is not a source of funds, it's a source of financing. So somehow that debt has to be paid off. Council can start to set aside money now to pay that off, or that can be paid off in conjunction in the timing of the project.
Thank you, Mr. Lang, for that budget prep. Yeah, we can try that. Okay, so is there any further questions on this particular item? Any comments? You've heard the motion. I'll call the question. All in favor? And that is carried. Thank you very much, Mr. Sear. Thank you very much, Mr. Sugden. We move now to inquiries, which there are none. Announcements. Does anybody have an announcement? Mr. Follis.
Thanks. As representative of the Orillia Centre for Arts and Culture, as the council member, 2 events coming up that are really exciting. One, November 1st on the Friday night. It's at St. Paul's Centre, and it's starting at 8 p.m. It's the Jane Bennett and McKay Kay, and I hope I'm saying that right. It's an all-female Cuban jazz ensemble, and it's described as explosive, and it should be really exciting for sure. The second one's the next night, November 2nd, St. Paul's Center again. It's at 8 p.m. And this time it's actually, it's called Kune. It's a really interesting one. It's Canadian Global Orchestra and 11 musicians from all over the globe. So it should be a really interesting night. And if you can make it out, really encourage everyone to stop by and take both events in.
Thank you. Mayor Clark, and then Councillor Cipolla.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, please indulge me. I have 3 announcements. One is this week. So this coming Saturday is the annual Mammoth Kiwanis auction. It's their biggest fundraiser of the year. They do many wonderful projects in the city, largely based around youth. So I would encourage you to go out and buy me something. And buy somebody something for Christmas. Also, I have a form in front of me, and there's a number of them, I think, floating around this chamber here. Orillia 2020 Ontario Winter Games sweater fundraiser. There's a couple of different types of shirts, or a hoodie and a gray zip-up for $40. Very reasonable, Mr. Merkley. I don't know how you do it for those prices. But anyway, if you're interested at all, and do like I'm doing, and order 1 or 2 if you wish. And lastly, tomorrow night at 5 o'clock, in the green room at the Opera House, a few characters in the city got together, some from a former hockey team, and a couple other people that are known for their goodness in the community of starting a group called Men with Heart. We're attempting to gather together about 100 men who will contribute $200 twice a year to a charity that the group will actually vote on twice a year. So I would encourage anybody, if they have the wherewithal and ability, please come and join us for a kickoff social. You don't have to cough up any money tomorrow. Just your opportunity to hear more about the project. Although we've had it on our minds for a few years, we are following now in the footsteps of Ripple of Kindness, which is a women's group essentially doing the same thing. And Amber McGarvey, who helped co-found that group, is coming to address the group tomorrow night. Thank you.
Councillor Cipolla.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want a special thanks to Mayor Stevens, sorry, Mayor Clark. This cold is really getting to me. To Mayor Clark for attending the Veterans Dinner on Saturday, and Councillor Follis. And I know Pat wanted to come, but she wasn't feeling well. And a very special thanks to Dave Dawson, who emceed. We had over 60 vets, and they're very appreciative. And we had over 200 people there, and it was unbelievable. So in honor of our vets and what they did for us to stay as a free country, we thank them. And a special thanks to Dave Dawson as MC, and Steve and Jay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cipolla. Back to the mayor. Mayor Clark.
Sorry, I knew that would be Ralph or Councillor Cipolla's announcement. I didn't want to steal the thunder, but I just reiterate, the Take a Vet to Dinner is a wonderful event. It takes a lot of work, and I understand unfortunately they've lost a couple of people off the committee, and other people have stepped in and taken the reign. But to honor the people that were there to the packed house on Saturday night was quite gratifying, and just congratulations to the committee. 15 years, 15th annual.
Thank you, Mayor Clark. Councillor Cloustra.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a reminder that also tomorrow night at 6 p.m. at the Geneva Center is the Downtown Orillia Management Board AGM going on as well.
Thank you very much. Good point. Any further announcements? Okay, we'll move to the open public forum. Cam? Wes? No? Okay, we're good. That's a no-go, so we'll call for an adjournment. Moved by Councillor Cipolla, seconded by Councillor Eamon. All in favor, and that's carried. Good evening.